All right, this is my third harvest for my worm castings. And as you can see, I almost got this 50-gallon tote completely full. My castings just keep getting better each harvest. Starting to figure it out. You know, the more you do something, the better you get at it. So right now, I'm getting a 5-gallon bucket, and I'm not going to screen any of it into 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch. I'm just going to take it off the top and mix it in with some soil that I'm going to use for my garden. So that's what I'll be doing right now. I'm just going to get 5 gallons of castings and not even going to worry about screening it. So I've been letting this dry out just a little bit and just taking off the top. I've had a light right above it, so my theory is that the worms will go down just a little ways, and I'm just going to take it right off the top. All right, that's really all I needed. I just need 5 gallons of castings to mix up some soil I'm working on. So that'll do for now. Go ahead and let the rest of this dry out some. Let my light shine. The worms will go down. Go ahead and get another 5 gallons later on. Got my 5 gallons of castings. It's looking good. All right, like I said, I'm just harvesting 5 gallons of this at a time. Then I'll let it dry out, and I'll go ahead and harvest another 5 gallons. I have my 5-gallon bucket. Just gonna fill it up. Just gonna fill it up with everything off the top. As you can see, there is some worms down right in here. You'll come across some worms. If you do, you just move to another area that's dry. If I get a few worms in here, that's okay, because this is all going to go into a live organic soil. And it's good to go ahead and, you know, have some worms in there to go ahead and work over your raised beds. Try to prevent, you know, from getting a lot of worms in there, because you're going to have cocoons already. Those cocoons is going to hatch and you're going to have worms. And it's not like I'm selling any of this. This is all just going to go right back into my raised garden. So it's not bad at all. So far, like, I haven't really seen too many worms. Like I said, I let the top dry out. Look at that carrot. Tell me this stuff isn't good. This was just a carrot that was chopped up, thrown in here for food, and look, it's already starting to grow some sprouts. This stuff is like some magic castings right here. It's the best castings I have so far. But you can see how dark and rich they are. It's going on almost 6 months. I've pulled about 20 gallons off so far. All right, that's 5 gallons of castings right there. And as you can see, I really didn't have to worry about any of the worms, because I gave it enough time that the top would dry out and my worms would go down far enough where I can skim enough off the top to get 5 gallons. Dig down in here and I'll show you guys where the worms are at. See, look at that. I mean, it's loaded with worms. But the worms are far enough down that I don't get a lot of those in the castings that I skim off top. All right, I'll let you guys see. These are the castings that I just took off the top. 5 gallons of castings right there. Now my plan is I'm gonna go ahead and take all of this up, put it in a different bin, put some food in this bottom bin, and then put all of this back. And I want my worms to go into the bottom bin. That way I can go ahead and get the rest of this. So my bin is light enough now where I can lift it up. There we go. Tricky part was trying to get it through that rebar. Wow, look at that. Yeah, that stuff is way too wet. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some really dry compost. And I'm gonna mix it in with this. Try to make it where this isn't as wet as it is. Go ahead and add just a little bit more. Still a little bit too wet for me. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of peat moss. Try to dry this up some. But I can already see where I'm messing up, is if I let my worms go through and they get into this stuff is going to have to be filtered out, because I mean there's clumps all in here. So I mean this would be a good idea if this bottom bin would have drained, but I had better drain hose. I didn't have any drain hose on it until I started seeing that I was watering just a little bit too much. So if I would have slowed down on my watering, or I would have had better drain hose, this idea would have worked out pretty well. But it was so wet in here that I had to add a lot more material just to get it to dry out. But still, I'm getting almost 50 gallons of castings that I don't have to worry about separating the worms. But at the final step, my worms are all going to be in here, and I'm still going to have to separate it. But that's allowed me to get all the castings that I've let the worms spend 6 months to make. The best castings that I had, that allows me to get those out and get my worms in here. And then once they work this over, I can go ahead and harvest that. It's just be a little bit more hard, be a little harder. So right here in the center, I'm going to put some food waste. So right there in the center, I'm going to put my food waste. I'm going to go ahead and put this bin back on top. As you can see, there's a hole right here. These worms are going to go from this bin, all this stuff that needs to be harvested, and go through into the bottom bin. That's my theory. So this is all of the castings that I want to harvest, but I don't want to have all these worms in there. What my theory is all of these worms are going to go to the center where I just set all that food, and then I can come back, do the 5 gallon trick, scrape off the top till there's 5 gallons, however many gallons is left in here, until there's no more worms left in this top bin, and all of the worms go through into the bottom bin. So it's just an idea that I came up with. This is the first time. It's all trial and error, but I can see one of my mistakes is I got too heavy with the water, and if I wanted to get that heavy with the water, I should have put better drain hose on the bottom. I didn't have any drain hose on the bottom at first. So if you don't have any drain hose, you need to watch out how much water you put on. If you do have drain hose, I mean, don't over water, but if you do get a little carried away with your water, then the water will drain out. But that's something that I'll have to correct on this next harvest. But there you have it. We will give these worms some time, and we'll let this dry out, scrape it off, and we will see if these worms go to the bottom bin. So I'm gonna go ahead and take off another 5 gallons. And like I said, you don't see any worms in this. You let it dry out just enough where the worms go down. Also place a light right above it. You know, the worms are going to run from the light, so they're not going to be right here on this top layer. This 50 gallon tub has enough room to spread out that I'm usually able to get my 5 gallons just right off the top. And you just skim right off the top until you run into your worms. Eventually, once you keep going down, you're going to start seeing your worms. That's when you know that you just move to another area. So you can keep just going down until you see some worms. There's some worms right there. So I know to not get in this area, keep going down in these other areas until I can find some worms. If it gets really moist, we can always go to this area, see there's some worms right there. So I'm finding that this is the easiest way to harvest my castings without having to separate my worms. It takes a little bit longer. You can't just harvest this whole bin at one time. Like I said, it takes weeks to do this, even a month. And if you have a lot of castings, which it's taken me just a little over a month to get to this point. But I mean, 5 gallons of castings every time is good with me, because that's what I'm using. I'm using 5 gallons when I mix up my soil. By the time I get my 5 gallons, I mix up some soil, I wait another week, come right back and get another 5 gallons. Just have to have a little bit of patience and just wait. See, I'm starting to get into the worms now. Starting to get into them, but also my 5 gallons is almost filled up. about the time you start getting into your worms, you should have about 5 gallons of castings off of the top. And also, like, if you kind of just spread it out whenever you drop it in, if there is, you know, a few worms in, you'll see them. That right there was my 5 gallons. 5 gallons of castings right there, little to no worms in it. So this is the easiest process so far. All right, I'm right here towards the end. Today is the day. I'm going to get as much as this as I can without getting any worms in it. And then I'm going to take the rest of it and I'm going to set it on top of the bin that it's sitting on. So I'm going to take, once I get as much as I can without getting a bunch of worms in it, I'm going to try to separate the worms as I'm just skimming off the top. I'm going to take all of this out. I'm going to lift this bin up, the bottom bin that's underneath here. I'm just going to set all this on top of it. And eventually this will dry out, the worms will go down, and then I can get the rest of it. But that right there is my 5 gallon trick. It took over a month to do this, maybe even close to 2 months, but I wasn't in a huge hurry. I was getting 5 gallons of castings at a time. I was mixing up a bunch of soil, some living soil, and it was working out just fine for me. So as you can see, I'm just skimming off the top, dropping it down in here. Once this gets full, put it in my bucket. I'm going to try to get as much as I can without getting any worms in it. And if you can just sit here and sprinkle the castings like this, and you'll be able to tell when there's a worm in there. See, like right there, just take your worm, put it over to the side. There's one right there. I'm probably going to go ahead and just use this right here for some compost tea. I already have all the soil mixed up that I'm mixing up right now. I'm good on the soil so far. I need some later on, but by then my bin number 2 and bin number 3 will be ready for a harvest off the top. Gonna go ahead and just do the same process with them. As you can see, this, all the worms are right there in that moisture. And that'll work. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these worms and these castings, I'm going to take it out of here, and then I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to put them all on that bottom bin. I'm going to go ahead and take all of this with my worms in it. Set it right in this bucket. So I don't have a lot of worms in here. I'm thinking that some of them probably went down into this bottom bin. At least I'm hoping so, because this was the bin that got hit pretty hard during the winter storm, and a lot of my worms got froze. I tried to preserve as many as I could, but I still lost a lot of worms. That's why I went ahead and ordered another 10,000 so I can get my numbers back up. Pull it out. Look at those worms right there on the bottom of that bin. So there, oh, that's heavy. So there's a bunch of my worms right there. They were crawling through the top bin down into the bottom bin. Go ahead and knock them off into this bottom bin. So this here is the bottom bin. Let's see how many worms I got. See, I put some food in here for them to crawl through. Yeah, so I mean, they're still pretty thick. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of these castings just right there on top. And the rest of the worms that was still in the top bin. And then this will start to dry out. The worms will move to where the moisture is at, and I can go ahead and take the rest of this off, and then I'll let my worms go ahead and work all of this. Once they work all of this and I harvest this bottom bin, then I'll go ahead and make a double bin again with the hole on the bottom. A little bit of compost at the bottom of this one. I will fill this top bin completely up and let the worms do their thing. After 3 to 4 months, I will go ahead and do the 5-gallon trick. So yeah, pretty pleased with how that turned out. This was the first time trying this, and seems to work pretty good. It's all trial and error. I got the same setup right here. Got double bins. So in about another 2.5 months, I will go ahead and harvest this bin. This bin I went just with the single tub, so the process will be a little bit different, but basically I'm just going to let it dry out and do the 5-gallon at a time trick. So that seems to be the best way to get your castings and separate the worms and castings, by letting the worms just keep migrating down to where the moisture is and taking off the castings that have dried out. And as you can see that these castings they're not as dry as how I was leaving my castings before. So you can see they're still moist, still dark and rich. You see how moist they are. So I mean, I'm not letting my castings dry out like I was in my previous harvest and on some of my previous videos. Had a lot of people in the comments saying that my castings were too dry. So I took their advice, and I'm getting my castings out before they get too dry, and it seems to be working pretty good. So that was the 5-gallon casting trick with the double bin setup, and hope you guys enjoyed and was able to learn something throughout my trial and error process.